at Chapman University. Well, a YouGov poll published this week found that there was considerable support amongst Britons for more government intervention in housing policy, often quite radical policy proposals, actually. According to the poll, 67% support a cap on rental rates, 65% support councils compulsorily purchasing long-term empty properties at below market rate to be turned into social housing. 49% supported forbidding those whose primary country of residence is not the UK from buying a house here. With rising rental prices, a record rise in house prices, a shortage of social housing, is it any wonder that 81% of Britons think housing is an issue in the UK, a very significant one at the moment? But where is the radical policy proposals by the Conservatives or the Labour Party? Joining me now to discuss whether it's time for a radical approach to housing is Ike Ije, Head of Housing, Architecture and Urban Spaces at Policy Exchange, and Labour Councillor Leo Gibbons, who is also the co-director of Price Doubt UK. Thank you both for joining me this afternoon. I want to start with Leo when he comes in. I'll start with you, Leo. Are you surprised by some of the polling that I've just described about the public support quite significantly for quite radical policy proposals?
Not particularly, no. I think most of us understand that there is a housing crisis. Most individuals who are in generation rent, like myself, feel it, and those of an older generation can see that their children aren't buying property to the same extent that they were or they were able to. So I think the awareness of the housing crisis and the salience of the housing crisis amongst the public is particularly high, and it's reflected in that policy. People want things to be done. They want intervention into the housing market. Unfortunately, that polling didn't really get to the crux of the issue, which is an undersupply of housing, particularly in areas of the highest want and demand. And some of those policies that were polled very popular, I don't think are the answer, and that's kind of my personal view. But I'm not surprised at all that people realise that we are in the grips of a terrible housing crisis.
And like you wrote recently in Conservative Home about the government's white paper and essentially describing that on levelling up in particular, that they didn't really have substantial proposals when it came to housing. I mean, could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, basically, on one level, and don't be too negative, the white paper was encouraging in the sense there was a scale of ambition about it. There's a recognition of the problem, and there was, in terms of at least ambition, if not in terms of concrete policy, there was a kind of commitment to do something about it. But my problem was it didn't go far enough. It was more about tinkering around the edges, kind of elaborating on existing schemes, rather than some of the kind of more radical solutions that I think are needed to solve the housing crisis in the country.
I mean, Leah, why do you think there does seem to be resistance to doing something quite radical? I mean, salaries are 6, 7, 8, 9 times in terms of when it comes to the house prices. I mean, salaries are just not keeping up. I mean, it just seemed like a huge opportunity for any government to actually do things that will really improve the material lives of people in this country. Why do you think there's seemingly no political will for it?
I think fundamentally it's because the policies that would really radically help aren't that particularly popular. For example, there was no polling around support for building 300,000 new homes each year, which is a government manifesto pledge. It's something that Price Doubt supports. I'm sure people would be supportive of that. However, if you then poll them on whether they want some of that 300,000 homes at the end of their back garden, suddenly the polling flips and people don't want it. And a problem we have at the moment is that we ration land through our planning system. We have very strict rules on where housing can be built. And actually to open up that, to build on greenfield sites, which we will certainly need to be doing if we are to hit our housing targets over the coming decades, if we are to reform the green belt, which we would like to see, those actual policies that will lead to those homes being allowed to be built, those aren't so popular. And there's lots of reasons for that. There is some genuine kind of conservatism that you don't want your neighbourhood to change. There is also a cynicism behind some politicians. They don't need to win the votes of potentially new residents who might buy homes one day in their constituency. They need to win votes of people already there and the voters who don't want new homes built in their backyard. Also, even more cynically perhaps, there are some MPs, perhaps in the kind of green sort of suburbs around London, who don't want to see new homes that could potentially have Labour voting young professionals moving in. So there's lots of hurdles on the Conservative side, and on the Labour side, sometimes there's a failing to understand basic economics. And actually, also, there is a want in local government to hold on to what powers they have to block new homes. Councillors around the country aren't really that powerful, but one thing we do have is a discretionary power to potentially veto new homes. And trying to get local councillors like myself to give up that power, that's incredibly challenging. So I'm just giving you lots and lots of reasons why the policies that we need to deliver aren't really happening. The ambition is there, but the actual drive to make it happen is too thorny for this guy.